All right, welcome to this week's live office hours. Casey, how's it going?
Things are good. Things are good. Yeah, I've been trying to work on some more video content for you folks. So, trying to get some stuff into those help docs, make it a little bit easier, kind of have a picture to follow as opposed to just some writing. But yeah, got some good stuff in the works over here.
Nice. Yeah, I'm jumping around a lot today, diving deep into growth. Got caught up on time, so I'm a little bit late. I apologize.
Ah, no worries, no worries. And anyone in office hours so far, if you have any ideas or requests for videos or content that would be helpful for you folks, always feel free to ping those in the chat here via chat on the website itself through your account. And always helps to have a little bit of direction, making sure I'm making things that are going to be most impactful for everybody here.
Yeah, it's one area we're trying to triple down on is content. I think we do a weekly blog post, and I try to be as in depth on those as I can. But sometimes you just need good videos, right? And not just covering general topics like I mainly do on the blog side, but how do I do X in Aura, or how do I do Y in Aura, and like how do I troubleshoot certain things? This is something we've been talking about internally. Is there are times when you kind of just have questions and something went a little weird and you need to jump in, and we're obviously always happy and available to jump in and help with those things. But it is nice when you don't have to rely on somebody on the team to be able to do that kind of troubleshooting yourself. So we're putting together a lot of different resources on that front, which is fun. And speaking of content, I am finally wrapping up my presentation for AMZ United, which took up so much time because I'm very anticipatory. I can't speak today. I'm very anxious in a positive way about speaking. I haven't spoken in person in a hot minute, and it's gonna be a massive group, which is both exciting, but like also I want to make sure like we're putting together content that is very unique, that is very much like, oh, I didn't think about it that way, and okay, here's what I need to change and move forward. So one thing I'm not going to do is just dive straight into like, here's how to build a repricing strategy. I think that's covered so well, and you're paying to be at this event. Let's talk about things that are not talked about as readily, especially like how I'm thinking about things moving into the future. So it's gonna be fun. It's gonna be a really fun time. I'm really geeked out. Flying out to Boston on Monday, so that'll be good, and then straight from there to New Jersey. So if you haven't grabbed a ticket, you should. I think there's still some availability left, although I'm not sure how much, but it's going to be fun looking at the speaker lineup. It's all people I know super well. Chris Grant's going to be there. Corey Gainham's going to be there. It's just, if you want to dive deep into wholesale, this is the place to do it. Like like the entire event, if I'm not mistaken, is wholesale focused, which, having been a wholesale seller, that was not the case, right? The whole reason why we started the Wholesale Made Easy podcast is because there was no good content for wholesale. It was just here and there, and there was one course. And so the price of entry, so to speak, was very high for wholesale a decade ago. And now everybody and their mom's doing it, which is, I think, amazing, because that means there's more people testing things, more people sharing things. And we've talked about this on this, office hour session before, just the transparency culture that is occurring in the Amazon seller space, where people are not keeping things to themselves, like these, close guarded secrets. It's more just like, hey, like, most people are not going to do what it takes anyway. So like, I'm just going to freely share what I know. And like, that doesn't really create that much more competition for me. Especially if we're all doing it the right way. It could, in fact, have a positive second order effect where brands are more open to us, right? More open to the conversation, because the people not doing it correctly have kind of fallen by the wayside, and we have more people taking it more professionally, things of that nature. So yeah, it's gonna be fun. We got casino night that Monday night, so the night before the actual conference, which is one day. Very excited for that. Get to kick it off, be a little bit more casual, instead of just starting the day off hitting the ground running. So that's gonna be nice for me.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. I know we've talked about a lot on the kind of collaborative shift in terms of kind of the group think in the space. And I think we had a great session last week here where a lot of folks were sharing like, hey, if you're looking for, I think it was like the price where the buy box gets suppressed or things of that nature, where Amazon has that fair price policy. So yeah, it's exciting to kind of have it be much more people on the same team as opposed to looking at it in a competitive nature. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do with the content as well. Kind of like you said before, not really focusing on the how-to, though still making content there, but also best practices, kind of high-level concepts and ways to think about repricing as a whole, so that you can set yourself up for the best results, just depending on your business setup. Obviously, wholesale, OIRA, and everything in between there.
Yeah. Being a seller back in my day used to feel very isolating. You very much felt like it was just you trying to figure it out and everybody else had their stuff figured out and you were just on the struggle bus. To me, that no longer feels the case because there's so much community, and not that there was a community back then, because there certainly was, but again, the culture I think was very different. And now, I mean, I can't count the number of Discord groups that I'm in, and that's just Discord, right? You ask a question, and we had somebody do this, one of our users, they just asked a question on Twitter and got an answer in like 30-ish minutes. It's like, great. Like, I don't even know if they knew that person, right? They were just following each other and sharing kind of their journeys. And that person happened to have an answer to a question that for something that they were struggling with. And they were able to solve that relatively fast. Back then you had to hope that somebody had written a blog post on that thing, or ask a question in a Facebook group. And most people would not give you a direct answer. It was very much like, well, you should already know this kind of vibe. And now it's just like, no, nobody knows anything. And like, if I do know it, then I'm just going to share it to you. Cause like, why not? It doesn't hurt me. And especially if we're in like, a really tight knit community or group, there's really no loss here. It's really just amplifying that person's signal. And I think that's kind of where we're shifting, right? You don't have to necessarily want to be an influencer, but having high status in the Amazon community is a beneficial thing because people are willing to also reciprocate that. So if you've given out tons of free value, when you ask a question, everybody wants to return that value that you provided to them and are willing to share things and help you out. They're willing to jump onto a phone call where they otherwise wouldn't have. If you have high status in OA and you're trying to make the transition to wholesale, you can probably reach out to 3 people and they're going to take a 30, 45-minute Zoom call with you, probably without charging you money. And so if you just think of the leverage of that, it's pretty profound. Again, not everybody wants to be an influencer, and I'm certainly not advocating for that. But I think being willing to kind of increase your signal, your status in the Amazon community is never a bad thing, assuming you're doing it right. There are definitely people who are doing it wrong, and that blows up in their face time and time again. So do it from a healthy perspective.
Yeah. And kind of like you said, just the ability to jump on calls and share things. I mean, that's without having to charge or pay for it as well. That's one thing we obviously strongly believe in. If you ever need an onboarding call or if you haven't received one, definitely recommend getting that scheduled with Finn. He's been doing a great job of taking more calls and kind of answering that stuff. And then we're also exploring different ways to potentially have, ongoing calls for folks who maybe are interested in potentially entering some sort of specific plan for that, but just having access to, expert knowledge, the guidance, and having just being able to have that one-on-one conversation as opposed to, just shooting from the hip, not really having any sort of direction, and just figuring it out as you go.
Yeah, this is one thing I'm going to talk about in my presentation at AMZ United is kind of like the current state of Amazon-based software. It's built on average to pass on the complexity to the end user. And what I mean by that is, here's 15 new things you can do. Awesome. That's 15 things I now have to deeply understand. Hope I don't mess up. Actually, what that did is that just overwhelmed me. And so there's this weird dichotomy in software where you want to add flexibility, you want to add functionality, you want to handle complexity, you want to increase performance, but you want to do all that in a way to where you can abstract it as much as you can away from the end user. So now what we've done is we've created this environment where we've increased performance, but asked less of you. That's kind of what we did with Maven. And I love this philosophy because I think you can extend this to most things. And so, pair a, friction-full software product with a team behind it that is not necessarily collaborative. And that doesn't mean that they're bad, but it can mean that they're not necessarily readily available to jump in and help. They're not creating new resources to support. That can create a lot of friction, right? So you already basically you're making a product that is harder and harder and harder to use over time and not providing the human-based resources to support reducing that friction in any way, shape, or form. So how does that scale? Well, I don't think it does, right? And so for us, we're like, well, how do we flip that on its head and say, okay, well, let's completely change the product side, make it as intuitive, easy as possible, as performant as possible, while also just assuming that it's going to be very frictionful, and let's create tons of resources and make ourselves available to make it even easier. I think we're in the friction reduction business as a software company. If you think about it, this is why we started, we were looking at, okay, we're doing these onboardings, but we're really not promoting them too hard. We're really just, if somebody asks, yeah, we'll do it. And we're like, well, why don't we flip that on its head too and just proactively do it, right? Because the data shows that people who are onboarded do much better. Great, let's onboard as many people as we humanly can. And so we started to scale that out, and now we're seeing the positive outcomes of that. So it's kind of interesting that we're doing all this with such a small team, a team of under 6. It's actually very crazy to consider when you kind of take a step back and think about, the headcount of companies that we're competing with that, they have 3x our headcount and a quarter of our users. It's like, wow, like, I think we're really kind of hitting a good stride here in terms of how we're operating things and how we're making certain decisions to be scalable. And it's funny because we're almost doing non-scalable things in a scalable way.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And especially what you mentioned around kind of providing more information, but not knowing how to dissect it. I mean, the only thing you can ever do, and I know I've said this a bunch on office hours, is just make the best decision with the information that you have at hand. But if you don't know how to read that information, you're not able to make those informed decisions. So by kind of creating that ease of use within the platform in conjunction with, the support docs and the ability to reach out to us and schedule time as well, trying to cut through as much of that noise that's not pertinent or informative to the decisions that you need to make, and helping you figure out, hey, these are the 4 or 5 places or items or figures you need to be looking at, and this is what they mean. This is how you potentially want to run with it moving forward. So just really kind of giving folks access, not only the tool, but the knowledge is also equally as important to kind of have them work hand in hand together.
Yeah. And I've said this countless times, but repricing is a amplification, a multiplier on inventory. If you have great inventory, it's going to do super well. If you have horrible inventory, no matter what tool you use, is going to struggle. But there is also this other variable, which is you, right? You, the seller. How you set it up is how it's kind of going to perform for the most part. And so there's this interesting product problem where if you, again, add too much complexity, especially to like the strategy builder, and it tanks everything. Well, the company's going to say, well, that's what it's designed to do. So yes, I did that. Did you intend for it to do that? Well, no. The moment that is true, that tells me the product has a problem. It's an education problem, or the product itself is not intuitive enough to find those problems, right? To kind of surface those things up prior to the user making a bad decision. In lean manufacturing principles, you would call this poka-yoke, which basically just means like failure proof. And what you're trying to do is say, okay, well, how do we build this in such a way that if you did less, basically like if you miss a bunch of stuff, is it still set up in a way that would be recommended, right? A good baseline default. And that's kind of what we did with the strategy builder. But then if you take that a step further and say, well, what does this look like if we further went into that world? And then that's where you get Maven as an outcome, because it's saying, listen, there's a lot of things you could do and we could expose to you, but the reality of it is a lot of people could get that wrong, and that could be disastrous. So why don't we remove the possibility of things going horribly wrong entirely, and basically make it so like you as a user can't mess it up. Like you could slow it down, right? You could have too high of a min price, things of that nature, and you're not going to get great performance, but it's not going to be, we tanked everything and like it really, like you have no inventory and like you're bankrupt. You know what I mean? Like that has happened, unfortunately, in our space. And so we're very cognizant of these kind of things. And so I think taking all these philosophies from other industries like lean manufacturing principles, the Toyota production system, whatever you want to call it, and porting those into software makes a ton of sense. And so it just makes things more fun. And I think it allows us to design and develop things in a way that, we highlight a testimonial on the homepage, which is like, it's got Apple vibes. Like, yeah, like Apple's very much in the same world of just like, how do we make this just easy to use and understand, yet still powerful? And that's a really hard thing to do. That's actually very hard. There's I forget who the quote is attributed to, but making something complicated is easy. making something simple is very difficult. And I think that's kind of one of our challenges, is like, how do we take something highly complex that is continuously becoming more and more complex over time and simplifying it down for the end user, for the average regular seller.
Especially without losing the impact. I mean, it's
yeah,
that's where finding that line is really tough. You need it to be specific or complex enough to perform well, but not so simple that you lead to whether it's user error or something happening in the background. That's why like you mentioned, we have a handful of safeguards kind of in place. I mean, our rules-based strategies are set up with our best recommended practices for those various situations, and then Maven as well. Really, all of those are kind of pre-designed and determined to not result in price tanking. Obviously, you can tweak those things for better performance and things of that nature, but really trying to make sure that we enable you with a powerful tool. But even if you're not fully sure where to do a certain thing, it's not going to be detrimental to your performance as well.
Exactly. See, Stefan has a cool question here. Can I use Aura to reprice a private label product? For example, have the price go down as sales slow or BSR rises, then increase the price when when the target BSR or sales for the day have been reached, all while not giving away too much profit during the price drops. So yes and no, not in the way you're thinking about it. That is a very specific use case. So there are like private label repricers. I hate to call them repricers though, because like it's a very different world. You're really looking at like, complementary products or brands that you want to target, and then making sure your product aligned and stuff like that. The simplest version of this is kind of what you're talking about, which is like elasticity, right? I have a certain target of sales volume I want to hit, or velocity I want to hit. And if I do that, do this other thing. That's its own thing. What you can do, and funny enough, we've tested this with it was an OA product, but we were the only seller on the listing. So, pseudo private label in that world. And what's interesting is using Maven solely, it was actually finding that optimal price as the BSR was changing. So it's not looking at like sales and adjusting based on sales, but it is looking at like, okay, the BSR just jumped 20% and we raised our price by 10%. Are we still getting good enough sales? Maybe, maybe not. If not, okay, I need to pull that back down. So more so than ever, you can test Maven on your private label products. But what I will say is it's not designed for private label products. So just kind of keep that in mind. It's certainly worth a test. It's not going to hurt anything. But if you want like true private label repricing, I hate to say that we have that, because we don't. And again, that's its own kind of model and world for what you're optimizing for and against and things of that nature. Really great question, though. I like that one. Private label price optimization is, and again, I'm calling it that versus repricing. A very interesting world. It's kind of like PPC, like smart PPC campaigns. Funny enough, Teikametrics is a pretty big software company in that space. They're probably 8 blocks away from our office in Boston, which is pretty cool. We haven't gone there yet. That world's very interesting, right? You see a lot of similarities when you start to add in tons of data, clear success metrics, and a lot of complexity, and you marry all that with AI and algorithms. It gets really fun, because even just like with repricing with PPC campaign optimization, you're doing real-time bid optimization, and a lot of times that could happen every 10 seconds, right? And so can a human do that? Can an agency do that? Absolutely not. You really need a complicated system to be able to understand how, what is true, what are we optimizing towards, what are the levers I can pull, and not just what are those levers, but how do I pull those levers in a way that really makes sense here. Because you could pull, lever B and that gives you a good result, but it actually took away from your end result that you want. It's a short-term blip kind of thing. And so you have to kind of get into this world of prioritization of those levers and understand what's the second and third order of doing that. If it makes sense for me to increase the campaign budget, awesome, let's do that. Okay, well, now our CPCs just went up 25%. That's not good. Now we're not profitable. So there's a lot of complexities and kind of relationships in these complex systems that you have to be able to kind of parse through. And that's really difficult. But to me, I think it's very interesting. It's really fun. But very much similar to like a private label repricing kind of world. You're taking in a lot of those things. Granted, I think it's far less complex than reseller repricing, which is what Aura focuses in on. There's far less variables at play with private label repricing, but it's a different model. And I think, listen, if you're running private label brands and not doing any kind of price optimization in any way, shape, or form, I think you're just missing out. There's certainly the obvious, hey, make sure I don't run out of, inventory. That's kind of your baseline. I would say if you're not at least doing that, you're probably missing the boat. But what sits on top of that becomes interesting too, right? Like what's the true elastic price that maximize or finds that balance, similar to what Maven does, right? Which is like, how do we find that balance between sales velocity and profit maximization? And that's going to shift 24/7, unfortunately, right? You have a big demand spike, great, price needs to go up. Demand's really starting to fall, we need to react to that as well. And these things can happen within an hour. That's what's so crazy to me. I talk about this in my presentation, which is like, we always talk about the two categories of things that sellers are struggling with, that speed and complexity. And the complexity one's the interesting one for me, but it's also the speed. It is how fast are you reacting to those complexities as the market is shifting. And again, I think what will happen is we'll continue to see an increasing of the speed response that is required. As Amazon's data continues to get better and more real time, you're going to need to do that. Because the opportunity cost of not doing that is so high, right? Not being optimized for 5 minutes doesn't sound like a big deal, but when you scale that out to, hundreds of thousands of products, you start to see, okay, that could be an extra $1 million a month in revenue or net profit, depending on what scale you're at. And so all these little things don't seem like a big deal, but when you scale them out, you're like, oh, wow, 1% increase in my margin doesn't seem like a big deal. But rerun that calculation doing $1 million a month or $5 million a month, and you start to see, oh, that's a whole new employee right there. Like that's another team member. So whenever we're building things, we're thinking about that kind of scale, right? Because we're operating not from the seller's perspective, but from like the platform perspective. So I'm thinking, okay, how many listings are we actively repricing? What's the revenue? If we could increase everybody's profit margin by 1%, what is that outcome? Like how much value did we just create in the world for our aggregate sellers with one little tweak? I just kind of went on a tangent there, but I get fired up with this kind of stuff. It's really interesting.
Yeah, and like you said, 1%, 2%, 4% doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're doing, $100,000 a month, that's an extra $1,000 to go back into sourcing.
Yeah.
And obviously you mentioned if you're bigger scale, 1% of a million is 10,000, I think, quick math, give or take. But yeah, it's really amazing the impact that those small tweaks and kind of optimizations can lead to. So yeah, definitely agree. It's a really interesting world. And yeah, on the PL front, we definitely get a handful of tickets coming in asking about optimization. And the tough thing with PL is Aura operates on a specific SKU basis. So it's not able to observe other SKUs and where competitors may be priced. But I do agree that Maven would be an interesting test to kind of see if it's able to self-optimize on your own specific listing, but would still be blind to those other competitors or things that you may want to take into account.
Yeah. And this conversation is why I'm so heavily optimistic about AI, because how do you find these things, right? And not just like from a platform perspective like we are, but as an individual business owner, because you have so much data, right? You have a few problems, which is like you have so much data related to your selling account, but you don't have good access to it because it's blocked behind an API that like you have to be a developer to even get access to it. So that's problem number one. Problem number two is like, can you react and analyze that information as fast as possible? Can you predict things, right? Can you see a trend that's happening and predict what does that look like and what do we need to do now to correct that, whether it's good or bad? Or you have access to it and you can, let's just assume for a moment you are, superhuman and you can parse information super fast. Can you actually understand the data you're looking at, right? Can you, you almost have to be a data analyst. And I think this is a big problem right now, which is like, and I said this a decade ago, like you need to be operating like you're a software company. And what I mean by that is we're so data driven. We have to be like, there's nothing tangible here, right? It's all on the internet. And so like, you have to be able to view the data and understand what does that mean? And what does that mean for me? And what decisions do I need to make? And like, if I do X, does Y happen? And is that Y good or bad? And that's asking a lot of non-technical people, right? Most sellers outside of like I think 2 that I know are non-technical, meaning they're not computer science majors, like software engineers. Software engineers crush it. But it is asking a lot for people to be able to do that. And my mind always goes to, well, what if you could? What if you could solve all three of those problems? And what if you could create almost, I call it like a seller co-pilot, right? There's a big theme right now in the software world, which is like co-pilots, right? So like if you're a salesperson, AI will sit in on your conversation, transcribe everything, and then give you feedback on how to do better. Hey, you need to slow it down here. Hey, you need to explain this a little bit better. The person didn't ask enough questions. You spoke 80% of the time. That should realistically be 30 to 40% of the time. Okay, cool. I have this feedback, but I've got this co-pilot thing that's kind of helping me as I go. Well, what if you had that for the business? What if you had a system, an AI that understood all your data and could make recommendations like, hey, by the way, there was like a weird thing that happened yesterday. I got to the bottom of it. Here's what occurred. Here's what that means for you. And maybe it gives you next actions like, hey, here's what you should do. Or, hey, here's what you shouldn't do. Or, hey, this product is doing so well and has so much good performance and so much good profit margin. And the PPC keywords are very affordable, running some back of the napkin math, so to speak. You should be spending $300 to $500 a day on a discovery campaign for that product. Interesting. Like imagine that world. But again, it requires access to the data. It requires that system to obviously exist. But I think this is kind of where we're going. I think every industry is going to a co-pilot. There's one for lawyers right now called Harvey, and they're basically trying to get rid of paralegals, right? They're just like, hey, like people need tons of paralegals to do crazy amounts of case research. What if an AI had access to all case information? I'm not up on my technical or my legal lingo here, but you're right. It's got access to all these things, and like, here's what you should focus in on. Here's 3 cases that really relate to yours and how they're won, and blah blah blah. Like, it's happening time and time again. Even in our support system, they now have Fin, which, you know, they have their own version of Copilot where it's hooked up to all of our support, external and internal documentation. And if Casey or Finn's ever, funny enough, Finn, if either one of you are like, how do I deal with this? Or what's this answer? I don't know. You just ask that question. It goes, here's the answer, and here's where I found that answer. It doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but think about how fast it makes you. And so if you kind of extrapolate that to sellers, a lot happens. And I don't think this is just a seller problem. I think this is just a business problem. Like, I want this for Aura. I want to hook up all of our data to an AI and be like, find me what we should focus on. You tell me what the priorities should be, because you can see things at a much more granular level than I ever could, just being a human. And imagine the decisions you can make, right? So we talked about like having these little, that 1% tweak. Absolutely. I also want that 10x tweak, right? I want that thing that's like, hey, you're spending 40% of your capital on the toy category on Amazon when you shouldn't be doing that. Like there's so much more opportunity over in these categories where you consistently crush it. You should reallocate that capital to there. And I'll let you know as we get closer to Q4 when that should change, because it's not always true. Awesome. How should I do that? Where should I do that? Right? Like, and I used to do this with Excel because I'm a nerd. You have a problem where you have access to however many in number of profitable products to purchase, and you have Y capital, and that's always the limitation. You got 50 grand, but you have $100,000 worth of inventory. How do you appropriately maximize your ROI with your spend? It would be slightly wrong to just say, we'll start with your highest ROI and work down. That's not always going to be the case. Now, simplistically, that works. But once you start factoring in things like, what's the return rate on those? What's the lead time on those, right? Like, you can see how you can make things more complicated, but it would give you better results. But humans aren't good with that. So what if you could upload a file or just connected, and the system's like, how much you got? You got 50 grand? Awesome. Here's what you need to do. I factored in return rates. I factored in lead times. I factored in X, Y, and Z. Here's what your POs should be for wholesale. Or here's what your restocks should go be. Awesome. Great. What if you woke up every single morning with a list of things to go buy for OA that you know are going to do really, really well, and you don't have to go and track those things down? And the price changed, by the way. Here's a notification. There's a big discount happening right now. You should be aware of that. Here's the code. That thing that wasn't profitable is now profitable again. And analyzing the actual data for that listing, there's not that many sellers on it, and that hasn't really changed in a hot minute. You're going to be fine here. Or, hey, that looks profitable, but actually the competition rate is increasing 5% per day. So based on the lead times and things of that nature, we should hold off on this because there's better things to spend your capital on. I mean, dude, that's where we're going. That's where cutting edge tech is going. And I'm very excited and scared at the same time.
Yeah. And I mean, we always talk about ways to kind of optimize your time, free up time to do more things that create the biggest impact for you. And the easiest way, or one thing that I feel like we haven't talked about recently, but we used to talk about getting a virtual assistant to kind of take things off your plate. But even an AI co-pilot or an automated system is going to be even cheaper than the VAs that are cheaper than a regular employee. So if you continue to make things more accessible, more affordable, to free up more of your time, not only you're saving time, you're saving money, which time is money. So a little ipso facto there, but yeah, it's interesting to kind of look at the world and how quickly those AI assistants, those AI kind of like you said, you log in the morning, there's a quick summary of actions that you need to do, kind of those performative automations that really help you focus on your time that you do have available to spend, and then in turn frees up more time for you later in the day. They're really impactful, and they're accelerating and improving at a crazy rate right now, which is exciting to see.
Yeah. That's what I think a lot of people don't understand is like the cost curve. So like Anthropic, who has Claude, which I love, I think it was yesterday, had a post on Twitter that like they had something new, but basically the cost went down 70%. That's insane. So the cost of these models, and we're just talking large language models for a second, exponentially going down while exponentially getting better and more performant over time. So, and I've said this before too, like eventually you won't have virtual assistants, you'll have digital assistants. They will be AI assistants, and they will cost you pennies on the hour. And like VAs are already pretty cheap, but they're going to be much more performant too, and be able to do more things. I always go back and forth as a founder because everybody recommends I should have a VA or an executive assistant. And I've tried it a few times, liked some of it, didn't like other aspects of it. But my mind always goes back to, well, why can't an AI just do this? Because like what I'm asking requires no physicality. And so there's no one solution I found that works really well, but I'm collecting these components, right? You have scheduling. Okay, cool. I have to schedule meetings. Yeah, I can do a cal.com link, and I have those, but it's not as personable and stuff like that. There's a lot still back and forth. So I use Howie.ai, and I just CC Howie and tell it what to do or ask it to find availability, and it creates everything for me. Right. So you got that. You got emails. Like I'm still trying to find a great email solution. I think I found one earlier this morning that I'm going to try. But, if you break out the components of everything, especially like as a seller for what you do, either one thing is going to happen or another, which is, the first thing that could happen is this highly niche down specialist version of it, which is like, refunds as a, or handling like, getting refunds from Amazon. I talked to a number of Gatita and all them. I'm like, you guys think about AI? They're like, you can't really do it. It's like against TOS. I'm like, yeah, I get that, but I think that could change because like that's something an AI could do incredibly well. So you have like these niche specific things like inventory management, like, hey, optimize my inventory, my spend and stuff like that. It does that one thing and it does it really, really well. And you have like 10 of these things, right? Each one specializing. I think that will happen prior to a more generalized version, which is like my go-to, which is like a AI sourcing agent. Like it's probably not going to do everything. It's not going to handle refunds and stuff like that. But, that's handling refunds is a far less complicated. It's a more procedural thing than, hey, go find me profitable things to purchase. You know what I mean? Like that's all the requirements given. That's a very different system. So I think that's what we're going to see. I don't think we're going to see this huge AGI thing. I think we're going to see really, really good niche specific AIs that are designed for that one thing, they do really, really well. Now, it's still the same models in a lot of cases. Like I think Howie's using GPT-4, but they fine-tuned it for this use case and added a bunch of guardrails and other things. A lot of prompt engineering too, I'm sure. So, but I think I bring this up a lot because I think sellers need to be thinking through this lens and looking for these solutions, especially looking for AI-based solutions that are not geared towards Amazon sellers, but still work for them, aka they have the exact same use case just applied on Amazon. So, Howie is just an email scheduler. That applies to everyone, right? So if you schedule a bunch of emails or if you schedule a bunch of events and calls, that works for you. But I don't know. I have this vision of what it's going to be like to be an Amazon seller in the next like half a decade. And I think it's fundamentally different. I think it's fundamentally better too, because these things like getting slapped with, problems of authenticity claims or what have you. I think a lot of those come down to human problems. Like you source something you probably shouldn't have and you just miss the signal on that. But an AI wouldn't do that in reality. It would actually check for all these things. And I've talked extensively about creating, sourcing checklists. Like if you're analyzing a SKU, you should have your running checklist of I look for these red flags so I don't have that problem ever again. Great. Your AI could take that and check those for you and be like, yeah, I found nothing. Or like, man, I'm noticing this big problem. What's the common pattern here that we're missing? Oh, well, all these products have this one particular interesting variable. Okay, let's remove that and avoid those moving forward. Sounds great. Never see those again. Like, oh my gosh, man! Like this is probably me watching way too much Star Trek and Iron Man, but I think we're getting there. I think it's becoming more feasible and less pie in the sky. I wrote a blog post. Gosh, I think it was in 2018. And funny enough, back then I was not even thinking AI. I'm just thinking like algorithms and automation. Hey Siri, can you, do it? I'm trying to trigger it on my phone here. Can you, place all my POs for me, right? And my thought process way back then was, it's going to just run a crazy complicated algorithm and automate things for me. Now the world has completely shifted, and it's like, oh, take that and go to a whole different level. And so, yeah, it's very exciting. I think it will change a lot for sellers. I think it will make sellers more performant without having them become, again, things like data analysts and things of that nature, which, listen, if you could hire a data analyst, I think it'd be worth it. But there's those are $100,000 plus guaranteed. So plus benefits. Everybody wants 401k and, health insurance, but AIs don't need those. And it's going to cost you $100 to $200 a month for a 24/7 PhD level data analyst that has access to all your stuff. So it's cool.
Yeah, and I think I agree. It's funny to think of like Iron Man and Jarvis as like the shining example of AI. And I do agree. Yeah. I think we're a little bit closer to that than a lot of people think, but probably still a little bit further from that end game, I guess.
1,000%.
But yeah, I think having tools that especially inform your sourcing decisions, like we always say, good sourcing is going to be the best lever for performance. I mean, if you make a good buy, you're able to have a slightly lower min than other folks. And that tends to be the biggest factor in a lot of cases. Not necessarily that you're always selling at that min, but the ability to kind of dip a little bit lower in some cases, get more sales, increase that sales velocity is going to overall increase your performance. So it'll be interesting to kind of keep an eye on how the existing tools continue to develop and then new tools that kind of introduce themselves into the space over the next 2 to 5 years, give or take.
Yeah. So we're just kind of ranting here, having fun. Obviously, bring on the questions. We can talk about anything. Appreciate everybody making the time. But yeah, we can dive deep. Again, open office hours, so there's really no format here. We're just kind of geeking out. But yeah, we talk anything Aura related, repricing related, seller related, whatever questions, rabbit holes you guys want to go down. Happy to do so. We've got about 19-ish minutes here left on the hour, and then we'll get back to it. I have this like weird daydream fantasy where I put on like AR glasses, and I'm like, oh, all right, cool. Hey, what what do I need to focus on today? And it's like, oh, well, actually, I found this one thing last night. Like, I think we should consider this marketing campaign. Like, this one thing's not really performing well. I think we should cut that. Yeah, that all sounds good. Go ahead and do it. It's like, cool, done. It's like, right, take the whole, making recommendations, getting up to like, okay, analyzing the data, making recommendations on like what should be done, and then take that a step further and like just having it be executed is a whole different ball game. That is very exciting. And it's interesting because we kind of have the spectrum of automation, right? You have like a manual process, and then at the very end, you have AI, at least current state, but everything in between is so important too, right? You have algorithms, you have just like things like Zapier, just take like a manual process and automate it with code. And it's like, great, don't do that ever again. Problem solved. There's a framework by Ari Meisel, OAO framework. So it's optimize the process, automate the process, and then outsource the process. I think eventually you'll just get rid of the outsource. It'll just be OA, right? Kind of ironic, but right. You're just going to optimize it, and then you're just going to be like automate it with AI and like Zapier or whatever, do that. But I don't know. I think it's kind of cool. I got a demo, or I saw a demo of a company yesterday kind of building web-based agents that are pretty interesting. They cited some really like good performance that I've never seen. But it's like ordering groceries on Instacart, or booking a restaurant reservation on OpenTable. And that's pretty interesting because now if you can do that, in theory, you should be able to also book flights. I don't like booking flights. I just want it done. But I have my preferences, right? Like I pretty much exclusively want to sit by the window for whatever reason. And so like, imagine just being like, oh yeah, I need to fly there next week. Just sort that out. My preferences. I like to leave on Fridays, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, cool. You need a hotel too? Yeah, actually I do need a hotel. Okay, cool. I'll get that sorted out for you. And like, oh, by the way, I scheduled an Uber pickup for your departure and blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? You're like, all right, sounds great. That's very pie in the sky. But
yeah,
are we closer than 10% of the way there? Yeah. We're probably, 60 to 70% of the way there is my personal guesstimate. So pretty close. So I think as a seller, you need to be considering this more seriously than I think historically you should have. I think historically I've been way more of the dorky automation geek. It's like, oh, this would be great. It's like, yeah, sometime in the future, my guy. Very true. I think now we're like, actually, that future is right around the corner. And it could be next year, could be 5 years, equal probability, in my opinion. So, but it's very exciting.
Yeah. Little tip for booking flights. Tuesday is the cheapest day to book flights. And my research has found that it's cheaper to take an Uber to the airport, but cheaper to take a taxi from the airport away, because with flights all landing at the same time, it's always surge pricing, and the taxi's always just there ready to go. You got to be aware of, a taxi driver that's going to take you the scenic route, and I'll look in maps, my destination, and I'll find the main route, and I'll say, take me here, use this route. And then you kind of sound like you've been there before, and you're not going to get an extra $15 on the meter there. But I've definitely done a lot of travel research in terms of trying to find the best ways to book flights, get here and there, and get the best prices and stuff. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. Now imagine just handing that over to an AI assistant and be like, I need to go here next week. All right.
Yeah.
Can you fly out on Tuesday? Actually, yes, I can. Wonderful. Just saved you $300. So a lot of cool things changing. Man, Q4, it's here. It's actual real.
Right there.
I just updated the blog post for the Q4 recommendations and strategy. There's a few things that I wanted to bake into it, and a few things that I think the writing could have been better on. So I did update that. I'm going through a lot of our blog posts and actually just like revamping the content as a whole. Cause I'm just finding things where I'm like, oh, like this could be done better, or like this could be explained better, or this could be, kind of gone more in depth on. So doing a lot of that stuff right now, which has been kind of fun. It's funny. I don't really love writing blog posts, but I love optimizing them. That's the fun part for me. That's the more like geeky technical side. I'm really pumped for the presentation at AMZ United, though. It took many hours just to get the actual like wording down and like the flow for what I wanted to, like the point I wanted to get across, and then convert that over to an actual slide deck, which is not the hard part. It's the content that's hard, you know? There's just so much I want to get across, and I'm trying not to nerd out too hard, but I'm trying to like really like get drive the point home. So hopefully I'll do that. I feel pretty positive about it. Again, a little nervous, but it'll be fun.
Yeah, I'm sure you'll be good. And I'm definitely the same way. I'm better at editing than creating from scratch. But in regards to like the content, specifically like that Q4 blog content, was there any like tidbit or advice or like update that you put into that article that was missing before that you think would make a big impact for folks kind of getting ready for that time of year?
I really wanted to go more in depth on the inventory management side of things, because I think a lot of people struggle with that, especially like the pre-order side, and making sure that you're giving your brands, if you're doing wholesale, enough lead time. And we've talked about this on office hours. I just didn't really bake that into the original post. But you really need to understand lead times change dramatically going into Q. Like they're probably starting to change now. If you look forward enough on your orders, that can very much be the case. And so just really getting sellers to understand, especially again on the wholesale side, although I think this could still be true on OA and RA, is like your brands also have logistics, right? So you have to manufacture a product, ship it across the country in a lot of cases. Then they do their thing and then ship it out to you, your prep center, and then you ship it out to FBA. That could take 3 months in some cases. And so if you can understand that concept, then you can place larger orders that are back ordered and say, hey, here's a 5,000 unit order. I'm going to need this like October, but I'm giving you guys 60 days before it's effective. That way you have time to do what you need to do. You can forecast. Like everybody has to forecast, and like forecasting is so difficult. I've yet to find somebody who does forecasting incredibly well. You just need so much data for it, and there's so many different ways to do it, but brands are going to forecast as best they can. But if you're a new seller with a brand and they're not used to working with Amazon and obviously it's Q4, everybody's demand's going to go up, but they may not be factoring you in correctly. And so you run the risk of, hey, I need 5,000 units. And they're like, I have 1,000 I can set aside for you. And like, that's it. And like 5,000 was my low number. That's a problem. So just making sure that like part of your strategy is looking forward, predicting, you doing your own forecasting, where should I really be volume wise on my orders, and then kind of placing those out in a way that your brands or distributors can actually fulfill that. I think some sellers, for whatever reason, just have this assumption that like I just order and they fulfill it. Well, yeah, during regular season, sure, all day, but like Q4 is a whole different ballgame, and you have to understand how that ballgame changes. So giving them a little bit of foresight will help a great deal. And honestly, I think it's worth the conversation with them too. I don't think you just come at them with a 5K order, post dated 60 days. I think you have a conversation with them like, hey, here's kind of what I'm thinking is going to happen. How do I work with you guys to make sure there's no capacity issues on your end? And how do we place these POs in a way that makes sense? They may say, hey, we can't do a 5,000 unit order, but what we can do is we can parse these out. We can do 5 in total, but we'll do, 1K this month just to kind of get us moving. That way, worst case, if we do have a delay on the last 1,000 units, and you missed Q4 on that, at least you got this early. And like, does that make sense for you? Like we can have that conversation and go back and forth. I would say that's very much worth the conversation with your brands and distributors of like, how are you guys thinking about it? Here's kind of my assumption. Is that in alignment with what you guys are planning? If not, let's have that discussion. And how would you prefer me to place these POs in a way that like, it's worth it if you need to go to manufacturing because you have a PO on the docket, but I don't need it today.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. See, question here. Hi, everyone. I'm brand new to repricing in Aura. Welcome. It's my first repricer, and I have some questions that may come off as simple but important to me. Is it safe to leave the settings at the presets until I better understand the intricacies of repricing software? Also, can you provide me a suggestion for determining if it's best for me to choose to focus on ROI or profit margin in the Aura settings as a new seller? Casey, I'm going to handle the ROI versus profit margin, and then I'll kick it over to you on the strategy side.
Sure.
So the way I think it's easier for people to understand conceptually ROI than profit margin. I mean, they're both very simplistic equations, but I think it's just easier because you're investing in inventory and getting a return on that. It's an easier thing for most people for some reason. So I would say focus on ROI first. If you get big enough, you really you got it covered. Definitely take a look at profit margin. Profit margin makes a lot of sense in a lot of cases, but I think as a business, you kind of have to pick one or the other and operate from that perspective. Like for me, when I did wholesale, I wanted to increase my average ROI. That was my North Star. So that's what I measured and optimized towards. But if I shifted over to profit margin, it could be very, very different. So they're two different worlds, but I would probably argue that you start with ROI and later, like a year or so later, then consider, okay, does profit margin make sense rationally for my business? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But Casey, I'll kick it over to you for the first part.
Yeah, so Rotimi, the great thing about specifically our rules-based strategies, whether it's the buy box targeting strategy or the liquidation strategy, all of those strategies are pre-configured with our best recommendations for those respective strategies goals. So specifically the buy box targeting strategy, that's going to target the buy box winner, try to slightly undercut them, give you a better chance of winning. You won't see price tanking there unless the buy box continues to drop below you. But the one section that you may want to just focus a little bit more on will be the min and max price section. We do have some recommended thresholds in there for you, but every business is different. You're going to want to just double check those figures as well. Another important piece will be setting your costs accurately. If you're going to be having Aura auto calculate those min and max prices, Aura will automatically take care of your referral and fulfillment fees, but any shipping, prep, or storage fees that you do take on for your items, you want to make sure those are baked into the costs as well. But in short, yes, those rules-based strategies will be preset with our best recommendations for those functions. And then Maven, the AI strategy, is going to focus on the best balance between sales velocity and profit margin. It does tend to focus on the profit margin side of things, and it does take a little bit of time to learn on your listings before it settles into that pricing range. Typically, we find that optimal price tends to be slightly higher than the buy box, just due to lots of sellers being on many listings and kind of creating downward pressure on that buy box price. But I would say, yes, you can definitely have confidence in those preset settings for those rules-based strategies. And then I do recommend scheduling an onboarding call with my colleague Finn. If you come into the chat function right in your account there, Rotimi, Finn is actually operating that right now. He can either send over his calendar link or I can send it over shortly once we wrap up.
Yeah, nice. So a few more minutes here, then we'll wrap up for time. So any last minute questions, anything we could dive deeper into? Rotimi, really appreciate the question there. Definitely recommend doing an onboarding session. It's one of the best use cases of your time, in my opinion. And we love doing them too. So definitely fun. I'm excited to get packed up. I got all of our swag shipped to the conference center for AMZ United. So
nice.
That'll be good.
Yeah, making sure we have enough shirts this time, right? I think
I'm learning.
Run out. Yeah, you talk about inventory management, right? How many shirts did you bring to the last conference? Was it like 10 or something?
No. So the first one I crashed. I only had like 7 shirts with me, and I just kind of crashed that conference, so we weren't sponsoring. But they weren't even meant to be given out. I was giving it to like specific partners of ours, and they ended up being given out anyways. And then at the Proven Conference, I think I brought like 100 something, a little over 100. Those went by really fast. I got way too many extra smalls. I was like, just give me like a bell curve. And the company was like, here you go. And like, that was totally wrong. So I learned my lesson this time. I gave them the bell curve. And we have like multiple hundreds of shirts this time. So I'm hoping we still run out, because that means like we don't have anything left over that I got to deal with. But gotta have a little bit of scarcity, you know?
Yeah. I got to create.
Oh, no way.
Right?
I actually have an onboarding call scheduled for 5 minutes from now. Actually, perfect. Tell Finn we said hello.
Yes.
That's awesome. That's fantastic. I love when that happens. Yeah, that'd be good. Yeah, this it's gonna be fun too to talk to users. It's always fun talking to users in person. A lot of great questions. We get to go way more in depth than we usually can in stuff like this, because I can ask like very personal questions like, okay, well, how are you doing this? What about that? Have you talked to this person too? So the conversations end up being really, really good and really, really like deep, which I really appreciate. So if you're going to be at AMZ United, please come find us, ask us all the questions. We'd love talking to everyone. It's going to be a great, great time. So Casey, any last words before we head out here?
No, nothing's top of mind. As always, folks, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us via the chat function right in your account or via email at hello@goaura.com. Happy to always help jump into your account, check on some strategies or things that may seem that they're not quite working correctly. Always happy to give you folks a hand. And if I don't speak to any of you before then, we will see you next week at the same time here.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.
All right, adios, folks.